Welcome to this remarkable frontier chronicle, where forgotten wisdom and unexpected innovation collide with tradition in ways that would forever change the course of local history. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're listening from and the exact time of day or night you found this story. It's always fascinating to see how far these frontier tales travel and when they reach you. In the autumn of 1857, the settlement of Clearwater Junction in Nebraska Territory was abuzz with both curiosity and derision. Thomas Whitaker, a 43-year-old newcomer from Pennsylvania, had become the subject of local gossip for what many considered his peculiar obsession. While other settlers focused on erecting simple cabins and preparing minimal stores for the coming winter, Whitaker devoted extraordinary attention to his broken freight wagon. The massive Conestoga, which had suffered a catastrophic axle failure during the final stretch of his westward journey, lay partially dismantled behind his modest homestead claim. But rather than simply repair or abandon the wagon as conventional wisdom dictated, Whitaker embarked on what locals deemed an incomprehensible project. According to the county clerk's records, he purchased nearly 3 times the standard amount of hickory, oak, and iron fixtures from the Territorial Supply Depot. The receipt book of merchant Josiah Keller noted an unusual purchase. To Mr. T. Whitaker, 17 lbs of assorted metal fittings, special order from St. Louis, $8.75. What Whitaker intended with these materials would later be recorded in the annals of prairie innovation. Though at the time his neighbors saw only madness in his methods, the Clearwater Chronicle, a modest monthly publication, carried a brief mention. New arrival W. constructs peculiar contraption from broken wagon parts, purpose unknown. Neighbors express concern over wasted resources. The distinctive sound of metal being worked echoed from Whitaker's property at all hours. Territorial postal records indicate that he had arranged for specialized technical manuals to be delivered from as far away as Philadelphia, an expensive and time-consuming endeavor on the frontier. When these materials finally arrived in October, Town Postmaster Samuel Jenkins noted in his personal diary, "Delivered unusual package to Whitaker today. Heavy-bound volumes on mechanics and heat transfer principles. Man paid substantial postage. Curious choice for frontier reading." Children from the settlement school, according to oral histories collected in the 1920s, often gathered at a safe distance to watch the strange newcomer work. Sarah Myers, who was 9 years old in 1857, recalled in a 1922 interview, he would lay out all manner of parts in precise patterns. Unlike other men who worked hurriedly, Mr. Whitaker moved with deliberate care, measuring 3 times before making a single cut. We thought him odd, but never frightening. This methodical approach would later be recognized as the foundation of his success, but in those early autumn days, it merely reinforced his reputation as an impractical eccentric, a luxury the frontier rarely tolerated. No one could have predicted how this madness would soon be vindicated when the merciless prairie winter descended with unprecedented fury. The days leading up to Whitaker's arrival had been unremarkable in Clearwater Junction. The settlement, established 4 years earlier where the Platte River met Clearwater Creek, had grown to 37 households according to the territorial census of 1856. Most residents followed the established patterns of frontier life: simple log or sod structures, communal barn raisings, and shared knowledge of seasonal preparations. Calvin Myers, whose descendant provided historical testimonies in 1962, operated the town's sole grist mill, which served as both economic center and social gathering place. According to the Myers family journals preserved in the Nebraska Historical Society, the autumn of 1857 had been particularly bountiful. Wheat yields exceeding expectations, the journal noted. Community spirits high. Winter stores adequate by standard measure. This confidence in standard measure would later prove catastrophic. The settlement's established families took pride in their frontier expertise, having weathered 4 Nebraska winters with minimal hardship. The system worked. Each family maintained their allotted woodpile, salted meat preserved in oak barrels, and grain stored in elevated bins to protect against vermin. Town council records from September 1857 document the annual winter preparation meeting, a ritual that had become increasingly perfunctory with each passing year. Standard provisions calculation approved unanimously, the minutes state. Committee confirms wood allotment of 3 cords per household with community reserve of 12 cords for emergencies. This calculation, based on average temperatures from previous winters, represented the settlement's collective wisdom, a wisdom that had never been truly tested. As October concluded, children attended the one-room schoolhouse, men completed final harvests, and women preserved the season's last vegetables. Letters from that period, collected by historian Eleanor Parsons in her 1958 volume, Voices of the Prairie Frontier, reveal a community satisfied with its preparations. "We have done as we always have," wrote Martha Stevenson to her sister in Ohio, "and have no cause for additional concern this season." The arrival of the peculiar Whitaker and his seemingly wasteful wagon project disrupted this complacent routine, becoming a curious diversion as winter approached. Town records indicate that Whitaker had purchased his land site unseen through an agent in St. Louis, arriving with considerable mechanical knowledge but little agricultural experience. His background, pieced together through later interviews with relatives in Pennsylvania, revealed training as a mechanical engineer with experience in the emerging railroad industry. This specialized knowledge, while valuable in eastern cities, seemed of limited use on the prairie until circumstances proved otherwise. The first significant snow fell on November 12, 1857. According to meteorological records compiled by the Army Corps at Fort Kearny, 60 miles to the southwest, temperatures dropped from a mild 45 degrees to 17 degrees within 48 hours. In Clearwater Junction, this abrupt change came without the usual warning signs frontier dwellers had learned to recognize. Samuel Donovan, the settlement's unofficial weather observer who maintained detailed atmospheric records, noted in his logbook, "Wind shift unexpected, barometer reading unusual, traditional signs contradicted." What followed was the earliest onset of winter conditions recorded in that decade. By November 18th, snow accumulated to 18 inches, with drifts reaching 6 feet in some areas. The Clearwater Creek froze solid, an event typically not occurring until mid-December. Most alarmingly, the main trail connecting the settlement to Fort Kearny became impassable, cutting off access to additional supplies. Donovan's Weather Journal, a meticulous record later donated to the State University, reveals his growing concern. November 19, barometric pressure continues abnormal pattern. Temperature holding below 20 degrees for 6th consecutive day. No precedent in my 7 years of record keeping. These observations, while troubling to Donovan, did not immediately alarm the broader community, who viewed the early winter as an inconvenience rather than a threat. Community leaders convened at Myers Mill to assess the situation. The minutes of this meeting, preserved on yellowed pages in the county archives, reveal confident assertions. Current stores sufficient for standard winter duration. Unusual conditions expected to abate. Only one dissenting voice was recorded. Thomas Whitaker suggested the weather patterns indicated potential for sustained severity beyond normal tolerance. His comments were noted with a dismissive addendum. Newcomer lacks experience with local conditions. The Chronicle continues with a notation from Town Magistrate William Hargrove. Motion to continue standard consumption patterns approved by majority. Newcomer W's suggestion for immediate rationing deemed premature and discouraged. This decision, made with the certainty of experience, would haunt the community in the weeks to come. Following the meeting, according to multiple journal accounts, several respected settlers openly mocked Whitaker's caution. Frederick Thornton, whose family had been among the first to settle the area, reportedly stated, "Eastern men bring Eastern fears. The prairie teaches different lessons." This sentiment, echoed by others, represented the frontier's particular brand of wisdom, a wisdom that privileged direct experience over formal knowledge. In their view, Whitaker's concerns stemmed not from insight, but from the timidity of someone unaccustomed to frontier life. Undeterred by this dismissal, Whitaker continued his project with increased urgency. Neighbors reported seeing light from his cabin well past midnight as he worked by lamplight on his mysterious contraption. The general store's credit ledger shows that on November 21st, he traded a fine pocket watch, likely a family heirloom, for additional metal supplies and tools. The notation reads, "Silver Hunter Case timepiece accepted as payment, value estimated at $12, $40. Customer declined cash difference, requesting additional metal stock instead." By early December, conditions had not improved as anticipated. The railway station at Grand Island, normally receiving bi-weekly supply trains, reported multiple cancellations due to track conditions. Telegraph lines failed after a particularly severe ice storm on December 7th. Clearwater Junction found itself increasingly isolated. The community's reaction, as documented in various personal journals, evolved from confidence to concern. Rebecca Oakes, wife of the settlement's only doctor, wrote on December 11th, "4 weeks without mail delivery. Children asking when Christmas packages will arrive. William says we must remain patient." The Myers Mill, which typically operated through early winter, ceased functioning when ice formed in the water wheel mechanisms. Calvin Myers' journal entries grow increasingly terse. Deck 14, mill stopped. Grain reserves adequate. Deck 16, still no operation possible. Deck 18, attempted repairs unsuccessful. The settlement's school, housed in a simple frame building with a single wood stove, closed 2 weeks earlier than planned for the Christmas holiday. Teacher Mary Wilson's records note, classroom temperature insufficient despite continuous stoking, ink freezing in wells by midday. Children wearing coats and mittens indoors. Education impossible under current conditions. Meanwhile, Thomas Whitaker continued his peculiar project despite deteriorating conditions. Eyewitness accounts compiled decades later describe his persistent work, hauling materials between his cabin and the dismantled wagon through deepening snow. The general store ledger shows his final purchase, before supplies ran critically low, to T. Whitaker, 12 FT of leather strapping, 6 brass grommets, 1 jar of tallow, $2.30. When questioned about his project, Whitaker reportedly offered only cryptic responses about mechanical advantage and thermal efficiency. The settlement's council, now meeting weekly as conditions worsened, again dismissed his continued suggestions for community-wide rationing as excessive caution. The Clearwater Chronicle's December edition, which would prove to be the last until spring, noted, "Unusual winter conditions persist. Community spirit remains strong despite inconveniences. Some shortages reported, but general consensus indicates adequate provisions." This optimistic public assessment masked growing private concerns. Church attendance records show increasing numbers at weekly services, with Pastor Elias Monroe noting, Deck 21, largest congregation since Easter. Many seeking comfort in community and faith as isolation continues. The prayers recorded in the church log shifted from general thanksgiving to specific petitions for weather moderation and divine protection, subtle indicators of the settlement's changing outlook. As Christmas approached without the traditional mail delivery and supply wagons, the settlement's confidence began to fracture. The first household to experience genuine hardship was the Jameson family, whose woodpile, calculated for an average winter, depleted rapidly in the sustained cold. According to church records, where Pastor Elias Monroe maintained a community welfare log, the Jamesons requested assistance on December 23rd. Jameson family requests 1-4 cord of wood from Community Reserve, granted with admonishment to improve management. The Jameson family's situation was not unique. The sustained cold, temperatures remained below 10 degrees Fahrenheit for 23 consecutive days, according to Donovan's weather log, consumed fuel at unprecedented rates. Traditional cabins, built with experience from milder winters, proved inadequate against the relentless cold. Settlers employed desperate measures to conserve heat, as documented in Rebecca Oakes's journal. Families now sleeping in single rooms, outer rooms abandoned to save wood. Hanging quilts and blankets as interior walls to create smaller spaces for heating. 4 more families made similar requests for emergency wood before month's end. The community's wood reserve stored behind the schoolhouse was being consumed at nearly twice the anticipated rate. Food supplies, while still adequate, required increasingly careful management. The butcher's record book shows the first reduction in meat rations on December 26th. Weekly allocation reduced by 1/3 to ensure sustainability. Expect normal resumption by mid-January. But January brought no relief. Army meteorological records from Fort Kearny document that the winter of 1857-58 produced the longest sustained period of below-freezing temperatures recorded since measurements began in 1848. Snow continued to accumulate, reaching depths that made movement between buildings increasingly difficult. Narrow pathways, shoveled daily, created snow walls over 6 feet high around the settlement's central structures. Communication between households diminished as families conserved energy for essential tasks. Community gatherings, normally a cornerstone of frontier social life, became limited to Sunday church services and emergency council meetings. The minutes of these meetings grow increasingly sparse as paper conservation became necessary. The January 4th entry simply states, "Wood reserve critical, hunting parties unsuccessful due to conditions, game scarce or inaccessible." Dr. Oakes's medical journal notes the first cases of frostbite on January 3rd, followed by increasingly frequent respiratory ailments. His entries grow concerning. Medicine chest supplies dwindling, no resupply possible. Traditional remedies being substituted with unknown efficacy. The doctor's own household faced challenges, as his wife Rebecca confided to her journal. William works tirelessly attending to the ill, returns home exhausted, hands cracked from cold. Our own wood supply diminishes while he tends others. Dare not mention this to him. Throughout this deterioration, Thomas Whitaker remained conspicuously absent from community gatherings, emerging only occasionally to collect his reduced rations or make observations using rudimentary surveying equipment fashioned from his wagon parts. His isolation reinforced the community's perception of him as an outsider, even as their own situation increasingly validated his earlier warnings about the winter's severity. The settlement's hunting parties, venturing out despite dangerous conditions, reported unusual observations about Whitaker's property. James Henderson's hunting log notes, Jan 9, passed W.'s cabin, returning from Eastern Creek. Peculiar metal apparatus protruding from roof. Smoke pattern unusual compared to other chimneys. Snow melt pattern around structure suggests higher heat radiation. These observations, while curious, were secondary to the immediate concerns of survival, and no formal inquiry was made. By mid-January, Clearwater Junction faced a critical situation. The settlement's carefully calculated winter provisions, based on 4 years of frontier experience, proved inadequate for the exceptional conditions. William Hargrove, the town magistrate, convened an emergency council meeting on January 18th. The minutes, written in increasingly cramped handwriting to conserve paper, revealed difficult decisions. Wood rations reduced to essential heating and cooking only. Consolidated sleeping arrangements approved to maximize fuel efficiency. Hunting parties to be organized despite dangerous conditions. The community reserve had dwindled to concerning levels. The schoolhouse closed to conserve resources, and families began to combine households to share heat and provisions. Pastor Monroe's welfare log shows 17 families now requiring assistance, nearly half the settlement. His entries reflect spiritual as well as material concerns. John 20. Community spirit faltering, prayers for deliverance more urgent. Some question why settlement so unprepared despite previous experience. Calvin Myers, whose mill remained inoperative, began distributing his personal grain reserves to families with young children. His journal reveals the emotional toll. Difficult to determine who receives what, all in need, all worthy. Responsibility weighs heavily. This informal welfare system, emerging from necessity, represented both the strengths and limitations of frontier communal ethics, mutual aid stretched to its limits by circumstances beyond normal planning. Then, on January 23rd, an unexpected turning point occurred. The Stevenson boy, 12-year-old Michael, suffered severe exposure after becoming disoriented in a ground blizzard while checking the family's livestock. Searchers found him nearly unconscious approximately 200 yards from the nearest building, Whitaker's cabin. Dr. Oakes's journal entry is succinct but revealing. M. Stevenson, brought to Whitaker residence, being nearest to where boy was found. Upon entering W.'s dwelling, discovered unusual heating arrangement, interior temperature notably higher than other structures, despite minimal wood consumption. Investigation warranted. What young Michael had stumbled upon, nearly literally in his semi-conscious state, was the culmination of Thomas Whitaker's mysterious project, and the first test of what would later be documented in the Practical Frontier Innovations publication of 1882 as the Whitaker Thermal Recovery System. The doctor's subsequent journal entries provide the first technical description of Whitaker's innovation. John 24. Return to W.'s cabin to check on boy, and further examine heating system. Ingenious application of principles I recall from university physics lectures. Multiple metal chambers capture heat normally lost through chimney. Air circulation paths force heated air throughout structure rather than allowing rise to ceiling. Consumption of wood approximately 1/3 of comparable structures based on my estimation. News of this discovery spread rapidly through the struggling community. The magistrate's log records a special meeting called for January 25th with a single agenda item: examination and evaluation of Whitaker heating system for potential community adaptation. The meeting, held in Whitaker's cabin rather than the usual town hall, marked a profound shift in the community's relationship with the once ridiculed newcomer. The revelation came gradually, as described in multiple accounts collected by the Nebraska Historical Society. Calvin Myers, whose journal provides the most detailed description, was among the first community leaders invited to inspect Whitaker's innovation. His January 24th entry reads, "Visited W.'s cabin today. Extraordinary modifications observed. Former wagon components repurposed into complex heating apparatus. Metal wheel rims converted to heat exchange chambers. Leather bellows system creates forced air circulation. Hickory and oak framework supports innovative chimney design with multiple chambers." The technical details, later documented more precisely through engineering studies, reveal the elegant simplicity behind Whitaker's complex-appearing system. The iron wheel rims, traditionally forged to withstand tremendous pressure, served as perfect heat exchange surfaces when positioned within and around the chimney structure. The wagon's brake mechanisms, originally designed to create friction, were repurposed to control airflow through precisely adjusted vents. Most ingeniously, Whitaker had incorporated the waterproofed leather from the wagon cover into a primitive but effective bellows system that controlled airflow without requiring constant manual adjustment. Pastor Monroe, less technically inclined but equally impressed, wrote, Jan 25, witnessed W.'s heating method today. Cabin warm enough to remove coat during visit, an experience forgotten these past 6 weeks. Most remarkable, small fire, great heat. Cannot help but see providence in bringing this man's knowledge to our community in time of dire need. What Whitaker had constructed, working methodically through autumn and early winter, was an integrated heating system that captured and recirculated heat that would normally be lost through conventional chimneys. The wagon's metal components, particularly the iron-rimmed wheels and axle assemblies, were positioned to absorb and radiate heat. A series of baffles constructed from the wagon's wooden side panels directed airflow to maximize efficiency. His detailed notes, later recovered and preserved in the state archives, reveal calculations for heat retention, air circulation rates, and fuel efficiency that were decades ahead of contemporary understanding. One page, dated October 3, 1857, shows precise measurements of heat loss through various materials, with annotations comparing standard frontier construction to his proposed modifications. Standard log construction with clay chinking estimated 40% heat loss through structure. Modified design with circulation system projected reduction to 15–18% loss. Potential wood consumption reduction 60–65% under sustained cold conditions. The settlement's initial skepticism transformed into urgent interest. As word spread, Whitaker's cabin became an impromptu classroom, with neighbors arriving to study his innovation. The magistrate's private correspondence discovered during the courthouse renovation of 1962 reveals his changed perspective. The very man we ridiculed as wasteful may have provided the key to our survival. His preparation, which we deemed excessive, now seems the only rational course. I find myself humbled by this turn of events. Whitaker, for his part, showed no resentment over his previous treatment. Multiple accounts describe his patient explanation of the system's principles, often spending hours demonstrating the mechanics to groups of settlers. Rebecca Oakes noted, "Mr. W. conducts himself with dignity, neither refusing help nor reminding others of their earlier mockery. Explains complex principles in terms simple enough for children to grasp, a true gentleman scientist among us." The initial challenge facing the community was how to adapt Whitaker's innovation to existing structures with limited materials and in extreme conditions. Whitaker himself proposed a graduated implementation strategy as recorded in the Town Council minutes. Adaptation priorities: 1. Community gathering spaces for shared warmth. 2. Households with elderly or infirm members. 3. Families with young children. 4. General implementation as materials permit. Within a week, adaptation of Whitaker's system began throughout Clearwater Junction. The principles, though complex in their entirety, could be partially implemented even with limited materials. The community blacksmith Jeremiah Tanner, whose ledger details the sudden shift in his work, became instrumental in modifying existing heating apparatus. John 2630 fabricated 14 heat exchange plates for community implementation of W design, prioritizing households with elderly and children. Iron supply critical, repurposing non-essential tools and fixtures with owner's permission. Whitaker developed a simplified version of his system that required minimal materials while still providing significant improvement over conventional methods. This adaptation, later termed the emergency implementation model in technical literature, focused on 3 key modifications: chimney baffles to slow smoke escape, heat exchange plates positioned to maximize radiation, and simple air circulation channels to distribute warmth more evenly within structures. The carpenter's records show similar activity. Modified 8 chimney structures according to W specifications, materials salvaged from non-essential structures. Priority given to designated community warming centers. The first such center, established in the church building on January 29th, became a model for the adaptation. Pastor Monroe recorded the transformation. Church now maintains comfortable temperature with 1 to 3 previous wood consumption, serving as overnight shelter for families with depleted resources, currently housing 27 individuals, community meals served twice daily. This transformation wasn't without challenges. Not every household possessed the necessary components or skills to fully replicate Whitaker's system. Some modifications proved dangerous when improperly executed, as noted in Dr. Oakes's journal. Burns treated in Peterson household, improper metal placement in modified hearth. Importance of proper clearance between combustible materials and heat exchange elements cannot be overstressed. Learning from these early mistakes, Whitaker developed clear instructional diagrams using charcoal on preserved bark sheets, paper being too precious to use for this purpose. These illustrations, later transferred to proper paper and preserved in the State Historical Archives, represent one of the earliest examples of technical instruction materials developed specifically for frontier application. The community's adaptive response, coordinated through daily meetings at the church, demonstrated remarkable resilience. Pastor Monroe's records indicate the formation of specialized teams, appointed heat exchange installation group under Whitaker's direction, established rotation for monitoring and maintenance, created inventory committee to identify and collect suitable materials throughout settlement. By February's first week, fuel consumption across the settlement had reduced by nearly 40%, according to the community resource log, while interior temperatures improved significantly. This efficiency allowed for the redistribution of wood reserves to extend through what was becoming the most severe winter in living memory. More importantly, it fostered a newfound respect for the unorthodox newcomer, whose foresight and innovation had transformed the community's prospects. Dr. Oakes noted in his February 5th entry, respiratory complaints decreasing as home temperatures stabilize, fewer cases of chilblains and minor frostbite. Community health noticeably improving despite continued external conditions. This improvement in physical well-being was matched by a renewal of community spirit, as the shared project of implementing Whitaker's system created purpose and cooperation during the darkest weeks of winter. The implementation of Whitaker's heating system coincided with another significant development. On February 3rd, a small expedition led by Calvin Myers managed to reach a hunting camp 12 miles southwest of the settlement. There they encountered trappers who provided crucial information. The winter's severity extended throughout the region, with multiple settlements facing dire circumstances. Some smaller outposts had been completely abandoned, their residents consolidating at larger settlements where resources could be more efficiently managed. The trappers, who maintained a network of communication through their wilderness travels, reported that a settlement 30 miles to the northwest had suffered multiple fatalities due to freezing and related conditions. They also shared news that relief efforts were being organized at Fort Kearny, though mobility remained severely limited. This information, recorded in Myers' journal, provided both context and urgency to Clearwater Junction's situation. Our circumstances, while grave, appear better managed than others reported. Whitaker's innovation, possibly unique in region, documentation, warranted for broader sharing. The expedition returned with game meat, a welcome addition to dwindling provisions, and a renewed sense of perspective. The community council meeting following their return, as documented in the minutes, focused on two priorities. 1. Continued adaptation of thermal systems to all structures. 2. Documentation of methods for potential sharing with other settlements when conditions permit. Upon his return, Myers and Whitaker began the systematic recording of the heating system's design, implementation methods, and performance metrics. Using the settlement's dwindling paper supply, they created detailed diagrams and instruction sets. The original documents, partially preserved and housed in the State Historical Archives, represent one of the earliest examples of frontier innovation documentation intended specifically for knowledge transfer. The documentation process revealed Whitaker's background more fully. Though reticent about his personal history, the technical discussions necessitated explanation of his knowledge sources. As recorded in Myers' journal, W. trained under Professor Hamilton at Philadelphia Institute of Mechanics, specialized in thermal efficiency systems for industrial applications, adapted principles to frontier conditions through systematic experimentation and calculation. Remarkable application of formal education to practical necessity. William Hargrove, embracing his official capacity, authorized the use of the settlement's official seal on these documents, giving them formal standing. Approved for official distribution when conditions permit, to be considered essential community knowledge. Meanwhile, practical refinements continued as residents contributed their own observations and improvements to the basic system. The blacksmith's records note, Feb. 8, incorporated Anderson's suggestion for improved air control using rotating damper. Efficiency increased approximately 15% based on fuel consumption measurement. This collaborative refinement process transformed the innovation from one man's creation to a community achievement, a pattern that would be repeated as the system spread to other settlements in subsequent years. The documentation itself became increasingly sophisticated, incorporating not just technical details but implementation strategies, material substitutions for varying circumstances, and maintenance protocols. This comprehensive approach, unusual for frontier technical documents, reflected Whitaker's systematic thinking and the community's recognition of the system's broader potential. As February progressed, Clearwater Junction established a new equilibrium. While conditions remained harsh, the community had adapted in ways that transformed their prospects. The rationing system, initially resisted but now embraced, ensured sustainable distribution of remaining supplies. Communal meals served at the church 3 times weekly conserved both food and fuel. A rotation system for the now precious commodity of heated space meant that the elderly and families with young children always had access to the buildings with the most effective implementations of Whitaker's system. The church welfare log shows a significant shift in entries. Rather than recording requests for assistance, it now documented volunteer contributions to community efforts. Feb 12, Henderson family donates excess blankets to community center. Feb 14, Miller children organize wood-carrying rotation for elderly neighbors. Feb 15, Women's Sewing Circle producing additional quilted wall hangings for heat containment in shared spaces. This transition from emergency response to community organization represented a profound adaptation to crisis circumstances. Dr. Oakes's medical journal indicates a marked decrease in cold-related ailments by mid-February. Respiratory complaints reduced by estimated 30%, attributed to improved indoor air quality and temperature stability. No new cases of serious frostbite in past 10 days. General health metrics improving despite continued dietary limitations. The community's records show another unexpected development: a systematic inventory of all wagon components, metal fixtures, and leather goods in the settlement, categorized by potential use in thermal systems. Items previously considered unimportant became valuable resources. The general store's ledger, maintained despite the cessation of commerce, was repurposed to track this community resource mapping. Henderson family, 1 iron cook stove door, suitable for heat exchange plate. Patterson household, 14 ft of leather strapping, appropriate for bellows construction. This resource identification process extended to knowledge and skills as well. The council minutes note, skills inventory completed. Cooper's barrel-making techniques applicable to air channel construction. Seamstress ability to work thick leather relevant to bellows repair. Blacksmith to train 3 apprentices in heat plate fabrication. The settlement was not merely surviving, it was developing new capabilities and systems that would serve beyond the immediate crisis. Even as survival remained the primary concern, thoughts turned to the future. Whitaker, no longer the ridiculed outsider, but now a central figure in community planning, worked with the Settlement Council to develop construction standards that would incorporate his thermal principles into future buildings. The council minutes of February 20th note, approved requirement for all new construction to incorporate W thermal design elements. Committee established to develop simplified implementation guidelines for spring building season. This forward-looking planning extended to education as well. With the school building repurposed as a community center, formal education had been suspended. However, Rebecca Oakes's journal describes an alternative that emerged. Feb 22, children now receiving practical education through system implementation. Older students learning principles of thermodynamics through direct observation and participation. W conducting informal science lessons during maintenance activities. The settlement's experience was transforming not just their material circumstances, but their understanding of frontier knowledge, blending formal education with practical application in ways that would influence community development for generations to come. The first signs of winter's retreat appeared in early March. Army meteorological records from Fort Kearny show the first sustained period of above-freezing temperatures on March 4, 1858. In Clearwater Junction, the thaw brought both relief and new challenges. Snowmelt created flooding concerns, and the sudden temperature fluctuations stressed structures that had weathered months of deep freeze. Samuel Donovan's weather log captures this transition. Mar 5-8, daily temperature fluctuations exceeding 30 degrees. Morning ice formation followed by afternoon thaw, creating dangerous roof loading. Community implementing rotating inspection teams to monitor structural integrity. The settlement's adaptation extended beyond mere survival. They had developed new systems for community resource management that would influence their development for generations. The thaw revealed the full extent of the winter's impact on the settlement's infrastructure. The carpenter's assessment, recorded in the council minutes, noted approximately 40% of standard structures showing stress damage from extended freeze. Structures modified with W system demonstrating notably less damage due to more consistent interior temperatures and reduced moisture condensation within walls. This observation would later influence not just heating system design, but fundamental construction techniques throughout the region. The practical evidence that Whitaker's system preserved structures as well as conserved fuel added economic weight to the innovation's value, an aspect that would prove crucial in its wider adoption. On March 12th, the first supply wagon in nearly 4 months managed to reach Clearwater Junction from Fort Kearny. The arrival, documented in multiple personal journals, was treated not as a rescue, but as a welcome reconnection. Calvin Myers wrote, "Supply wagon arrived today. Driver expressed surprise at our condition. Expected devastation. Found organization instead." The official report filed by the Army Quartermaster, preserved in military archives, notes, "Settlement at Clearwater found in unexpectedly good order despite extreme isolation." Community leaders attribute condition to innovative adaptation of heating technology developed by resident Whitaker. Requested official documentation be returned to Fort for potential broader implementation. The Quartermaster's report includes an official inventory of the settlement's remaining supplies, documentation that would later prove valuable in improving military supply calculations for frontier outposts. The report notes, with evident surprise, settlement maintains approximately 18% of original wood reserves despite unprecedented winter conditions. Attributes conservation to innovative heating methodology. Recommend engineering assessment for potential military application. The wagon brought not only supplies, but also news that the winter of 1857–58 had claimed numerous lives across the territory, with several smaller settlements abandoned entirely. This context made Clearwater Junction's resilience all the more remarkable, transforming what might have been a tale of frontier tragedy into one of innovation and adaptation. The spring of 1858 brought rapid changes to Clearwater Junction. As roads cleared and communication lines reopened, the settlement's experience during the extraordinary winter spread throughout the territory. The first newspaper account appeared in the Omaha Territorial Register on April the 2nd. Reports from western settlements reveal varied outcomes of winter severity, notable exception at Clearwater Junction, where innovative heating system credited with community preservation. Further investigation forthcoming. Visitors came specifically to examine Whitaker's heating system, with some traveling from as far as Council Bluffs, Iowa. The territorial governor's representative, conducting an assessment of winter damage, made special note of the innovation in his official report, dated April 17, 1858. Particular attention drawn to heating efficiency system developed at Clearwater Settlement. Potential application for military outposts and remote settlements warranted. This official recognition brought unexpected attention to the formerly obscure settlement. The town's visitor log, established hastily to accommodate the sudden interest, records 47 official visitors between April and June, more than the settlement's entire population. These included government officials, military engineers, representatives from other settlements, and entrepreneurs sensing commercial potential. Thomas Whitaker, once derided as the mad pioneer, received offers to demonstrate his system in larger settlements, though community records indicate he declined to leave, focusing instead on establishing his homestead properly after the delayed start. His integration into the community was formalized when he was unanimously elected to the Settlement Council in May 1858, with specific responsibility for construction standards and resource planning. The minutes record a telling statement from Magistrate Hargrove. This appointment acknowledges that wisdom sometimes appears as madness when first encountered. Our community's preservation stands as testament to the value of unconventional thinking. This sentiment, that innovation often appears as deviation from established norms before its value is recognized, would become a central theme in how the Whitaker story was told in subsequent decades. It represented not just technological advancement, but a philosophical shift in how frontier communities viewed expertise and adaptation. The Whitaker thermal system, as it came to be known, was fully documented that spring with technical drawings created by a surveyor from Omaha. These drawings, along with written explanations, were published in 1859 in the Territorial Register of Practical Innovations and distributed to settlements throughout Nebraska Territory. Demonstrated to reduce fuel consumption by 50 to 65% under severe conditions while improving interior comfort and structural preservation. The original wagon components, preserved as a historical record, were displayed prominently in the settlement's newly constructed meeting hall with a plaque acknowledging their significance. From these broken parts came the innovation that sustained our community through the winter of testing. This preservation of the original materials, unusual for a frontier community where practical reuse was the norm, demonstrates the settlement's recognition that they had experienced something of historical significance. The publication notice, preserved in the Nebraska Historical Society, states, "Herein documented for public benefit, complete specifications for implementation of the Whitaker thermal recovery system." The wagon parts became not just artifacts but teaching tools, as visitors were shown the transformation from transportation technology to life-saving innovation. The spring and summer also brought commercial interest in Whitaker's system. The Territorial Business Registry records 3 patent applications related to thermal efficiency systems filed in 1858-59, though none captured the integrated approach of the original. Whitaker himself, according to council records, declined to pursue patent protection, stating, "Knowledge that preserves life should not be restricted by commercial concerns. System to remain in public domain for widest possible implementation." This decision, while limiting personal financial gain, ensured the rapid spread of the innovation throughout the territory. By winter 1858-59, variations of the system had been implemented in at least 14 documented settlements, with many more likely unrecorded. The adaptation of the original design to varying circumstances and materials demonstrated the robust principles underlying Whitaker's innovation. The legacy of the winter of 1857-58 and Whitaker's innovation extended well beyond Clearwater Junction. By 1865, variations of the thermal system had been implemented in settlements across 3 territories, with particular adoption in military outposts where fuel efficiency was critical. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers commissioned a formal study of the system in 1867, resulting in standardized specifications for what they termed frontier thermal management. These specifications, housed now in the National Archives, credit Whitaker by name, a rare acknowledgment of civilian contribution to military engineering. The report states, "System originated by T. Whitaker of Clearwater Junction, Nebraska Territory, represents significant advancement in frontier thermal efficiency. Implementation at 17 military installations has resulted in average fuel reduction of 47%, while improving troop comfort and health metrics during winter deployments. Military adoption proved crucial for the system's wider dissemination. As soldiers completed their service and established civilian settlements, they carried knowledge of the thermal principles to new regions. Pension records from the 1870s and 1880s show numerous veterans specifically noting experience with Whitaker's system implementation as a skill, indicating its perceived value in frontier development. Perhaps more significantly, the experience transformed how frontier communities approached preparation and innovation. The concept of standard measure for winter provisions was largely abandoned in favor of what became known as Whitaker's Rule: preparation not for the expected, but for the possible. A territorial agricultural journal from 1862 states, "Prudent settlers now calculate reserves based on worst recorded conditions, plus additional margin. The lesson of Clearwater Junction not forgotten. Nature tests beyond average experience." Community planning increasingly incorporated structural adaptations for extreme conditions, even when such adaptations required additional resources that might seem wasteful in normal circumstances. Construction guides published throughout the 1860s show the influence of Whitaker's principles, not just in heating systems, but in fundamental approaches to frontier architecture. An 1864 Settler's Guide advises, initial construction should anticipate future adaptation to extreme conditions. Additional cost in materials and labor represents insurance against catastrophic failure, rather than waste. Thomas Whitaker himself remained in Clearwater Junction until his death in 1886, becoming a respected elder whose advice was sought particularly during community planning discussions. Town records show his continued innovation, with at least 7 documented improvements to the original system and contributions to water management, grain storage, and construction techniques. His approach to systematic documentation ensured these innovations spread beyond his immediate community. His obituary in the then-established Clearwater Daily noted, "We have lost not only a citizen, but a teacher whose greatest lesson was embodied in how he lived: prepare thoroughly, observe carefully, adapt thoughtfully, and share generously." The museum established in Clearwater in 1908 featured a permanent exhibition of the original thermal system, attracting engineering students from as far as Chicago and St. Louis well into the 20th century. The settlement itself underwent transformation influenced by Whitaker's principles. Building codes established in 1860 required thermal efficiency measures in all new construction, one of the earliest examples of such regulation in territorial settlements. The town's growth pattern, documented through survey maps, shows unusual attention to sun exposure and wind patterns in street layout, considerations directly attributed to Whitaker's influence on community planning. When the Nebraska Historical Society conducted its comprehensive documentation project in 1963-1965, the Whitaker collection received special attention, with researchers noting that many descendants of original Clearwater settlers still incorporated elements of the thermal design in their homes, more than a century after the innovation was born from necessity. Professor Eleanora Johnson, lead researcher for the project, wrote in her 1967 analysis, "The Whitaker system represents more than technical innovation. It demonstrates how frontier communities integrated formal knowledge with practical application to create uniquely adapted solutions." The longevity of these principles, still evident in regional construction, testifies to their fundamental soundness. This assessment touches on perhaps the most significant aspect of the Whitaker legacy: the integration of formal education with frontier practicality. His approach challenged the false dichotomy between book learning and experience, demonstrating that optimal solutions often emerged from combining both knowledge systems. This integration would influence educational approaches throughout the region, with practical application increasingly valued in formal instruction. The story of Thomas Whitaker and the winter of 1857-58 offers profound insights that transcend their historical context. In frontier communities, survival often depended on balancing tradition with innovation, community wisdom with individual insight, Whitaker's experience demonstrates that preparation is not merely accumulating resources based on past needs, but developing systems that can adapt to unforeseen challenges. The initial derision he faced reflects humanity's common resistance to unconventional approaches, even when established methods show limitations. This pattern, the outsider, whose different perspective provides critical adaptation during crisis, appears repeatedly in frontier history, yet rarely with such well-documented outcomes. The preservation of Whitaker's story provides valuable insights into how communities evaluate, resist, and eventually incorporate novel ideas. Perhaps most significantly, the transformation of Clearwater Junction during that winter reveals how crisis can catalyze not just temporary adaptation, but lasting improvement in how communities function. The emergency implementation of the thermal system led to systematic changes in construction, resource management, and community organization that persisted long after the immediate threat had passed. The documentation and sharing practices developed during this period, unusual for their comprehensiveness and intentional knowledge transfer, established patterns that would influence how frontier innovations spread throughout the region. This approach to systematic documentation represented an important evolution in how practical knowledge was preserved and transmitted in frontier contexts. The wagon that broke down on Whitaker's final miles to his new home could have represented failure or merely a technical challenge to overcome. Instead, through his unique perspective and methodical approach, it became the foundation for an innovation that saved lives and established a legacy of thoughtful preparation. As one frontier journal from 1875 noted in reflecting on the Clearwater experience, the true measure of wisdom is not how well we prepare for what we expect, but how effectively we can adapt when confronted with the unexpected. The broken wagon, seen through conventional eyes, was merely an obstacle. Seen through the eyes of innovation, it contained precisely the components needed for survival. This perspective, that within apparent misfortune may lie the seeds of unexpected solution, remains perhaps the most enduring lesson from the mad pioneer who transformed frontier thermal engineering with nothing more than broken wagon parts and uncommon foresight. It represents not just a chapter in the history of frontier technology, but a timeless reminder that preparation, observation, and adaptation form the foundation of resilience in the face of unprecedented challenges.